You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, about a week ago, we got some interesting news where the judge overseeing the Kilmer-Abrego-Garcia case, that's Judge Sines, agreed to a 1-week delay. We didn't know why that delay took place, but now that that delay is officially up today, do you have any insight into why it took place and what happens next?
Yeah, I think I do, Brian. First of all, it looks like we are back on track heading toward contempt. So that is what this discovery is all about. Abrego Garcia's lawyers are extracting information and evidence from the government, the Department of Justice, Donald Trump's administration officials, because Judge Sines is pretty convinced, it looks like, that the Trump administration officials are willfully defying her order to facilitate the release and return of Garcia and bring him back to the United States and handle his case as it should have been handled had he not been wrongfully deported. Now, I am pretty confident, Brian, that I know why there was this 1-week delay in the contempt process that has been underway. Anytime you see a joint request like this from both parties, both Garcia's lawyers and the DOJ lawyers, to just stop everything, put a pause on what's going on, Judge, it is almost always because the parties are trying to negotiate a resolution, and both parties believe in good faith that there is a good chance that they're going to be able to resolve this matter. Now, what does resolution look like? It looks like bringing Abrego Garcia home from that prison in El Salvador and handling his case as it should have been handled. But it looks like maybe now the potential for a resolution has completely broken down. There's another little nugget in the brand new court order today, resetting the discovery schedule. And the judge mentions that she has also denied a government DOJ motion to, again, pause matters. It looks like the government lawyer said, we want more time to continue working this through. And there's one line saying she denied that request. I have a feeling Garcia's lawyers probably smelled nothing but a delay tactic. They opposed the request, and the judge said, no, DOJ, Trump's lawyers, I'm not giving you any more time. So right now, she has put this case back on track for all of this discovery. What is that? It's a fancy word for getting all the information that Garcia's lawyers need from the DOJ and from the Trump administration. They're going to take depositions. They're going to answer sworn questions, answer questions under oath, interrogatories, and then they're going to collect up all this information and make their best arguments, presentation to the court about what should happen next and why the Trump administration officials should be held in contempt.
Glenn, there are two issues here at hand. One is the contempt proceedings, and if they're not willing to comply, then they deserve what's coming to them as far as contempt is concerned. But the other is the actual resolution to this, which is that Kilmer-Abrego Garcia there was a ruling handed down from the Supreme Court where his release was supposed to be facilitated, and so it's all well and good and worthwhile that the contempt proceedings continue. But what about the issue at the basis of this whole thing, which is that a court ruled that he had to be returned?
Yeah, there are a couple of things at play there. First of all, the contempt and how do you get the Trump administration to comply with the court order to release and return kind of dovetail with one another, because I would argue the most effective way to get the Trump administration to do what not only Judge Sines, but what the Supreme Court ordered it to do is to hold them in criminal contempt, jail the DOJ officials who are responsible, who perpetrated the criminal contempt by defying the court orders, and keep them in a jail cell until they purge the contempt. In other words, once they comply with the court order to facilitate Garcia's release and return, then they can be released because they will have purged the contempt. So those two things really go hand in hand and move forward together.
As far as the Supreme Court is concerned, I know that we've been talking about the legal basis for a constitutional crisis, and I do want to delineate the two because I think, generally speaking, we are very clearly in a constitutional crisis, but I think legally speaking, it would occur when the Supreme Court hands down a ruling, the executive branch refuses to comply, it goes through the appeals process, and that's where we are right now. And so when do we get to the point where the Trump administration has exhausted all of its appeals avenues, all of its resources, and they are just outright refusing to comply with a court ruling, and does kind of submerge us into this constitutional crisis that we've spoken about?
You know, Brian, we are within a hair's breadth of that right now because of another development related to the Abrego Garcia case. Trump just made a statement that he can bring Abrego Garcia back, but he won't. The reason that's important is really at least twofold. One, both his attorney general, or I think more accurately, Donald Trump's consigliere, Pam Bondi, said we can't bring him back, that he is now in the sovereign custody and control of El Salvador, so we can't bring him back. And more importantly, the DOJ lawyers who are in the Garcia case in court with Judge Sines put in writing that because he's now in the custody and control of a sovereign nation, the United States really can't bring him back. Donald Trump just put the lie to both what Bondi said and to what the DOJ lawyers represented in court, because he said, of course I can bring him back, but I won't. So that really does push us into constitutional crisis territory, at least practically speaking, in the court of public opinion. But in the court of law, as you point out, he probably gets one more trip to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will have to say, okay, here's what we meant by facilitate his release and return. And I think the Supreme Court will finally draw a definitive line in the sand and say, we are ordering that. I am suspecting they will do this. With this Supreme Court, it's always anybody's bet. But I strongly suspect, now that Trump has announced he will defy outright, they will probably draw a line in the sand saying, we are ordering the government to return Abrego Garcia by, and they'll set a date certain. And thereafter, we will address any refusal or failure to abide by our court orders. Brian, even though I'm a career rule of law guy, at this point, I'm rooting for Donald Trump to just take us over the edge of the constitutional crisis cliff. And the reason is that once Donald Trump has announced, I am ending our constitutional construct of government, I will not abide by Supreme Court rulings, directives, and edicts. So that will be him announcing, I am now a dictator. If he does that, Brian, when push comes to shove and he tries to use the military to keep him in power, which I believe is the ultimate end game, if he is to retain power once he's declared he is a dictator, in my opinion, as an old Army guy, it will make the military's decision a little bit easier, because they do not take an oath of loyalty to a dictator. And if Donald Trump is openly and proudly declaring he's a dictator in substance, they will be able to disobey orders that involve keeping him in power. I am projecting down the road now, but I do think if Donald Trump remains on the dictatorial path, this is where things will end up.
I'm curious what you think the legal exposure is for the lawyers who have been in court basically saying that their hands are tied because they take their directives from Donald Trump, and then Trump on the outside, at least during that 60 Minutes interview, goes, oh, you know, there's nothing I can do. My hands are tied. I would love to have him released, but it's the lawyers who don't want to. What happens to the lawyer when he goes into the courtroom the next day after Trump threw them under the bus?
You know, what does the lawyer say? Does the lawyer say Donald Trump is wrong, or does the lawyer continue to parrot Donald Trump's lies? There is no good answer to that question other than those lawyers should save themselves. They should stand up and say, I will not go into court, violate my oath as an officer of the court to be completely honest and candid in all of my representations on behalf of the American people. If you're a DOJ lawyer, they should save themselves and opt out. I mean, I don't know how these people sleep at night when they're going in there and not only making misrepresentations to the court, but these lawyers have already bought themselves a bar counsel referral and an ethics investigation. The reason I say that, Judge Sines put in writing that during the discovery process, the DOJ lawyers were providing the court with, quote, falsehoods, her word, and she determined that they were acting in willful bad faith. those things, those findings by a federal court judge, will get those lawyers referred to bar counsel for an ethics investigation 10 times out of 10.
And finally, Glenn, when can we expect these next steps to take place? Like I said in the very beginning of this video, we were waiting for that 1 week delay that we didn't have any insight in, at least until the beginning. We now know that it was likely what we can now see is a failed effort to try and reconcile some solution here. And so what are next steps moving forward? When will we get some resolution? And is there some imperative to move quickly as far as the judge is concerned?
Well, certainly as far as Abrego Garcia is concerned, being
Right.
Detained in a dangerous El Salvadoran prison. But we know exactly what the next steps are, because in denying DOJ's request for more time and resetting and restarting discovery in the case, the judge set out a schedule by which interrogatories must be completed, depositions must be completed, document production must be completed, and all of that must be done by May 14. So we will know by May 14 what the next step is. It will probably be a court hearing not long after that, by which the judge can make some decisions about contempt and about her next steps as the presiding judge.
All right, well, we will leave it there. I do want to mention one thing, and that is, I know that there was some consternation among Democrats, at least some folks on the left, that it is kind of a fool's errand to continue talking about the issue of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, because we should be talking about tariffs and the economy and these failed trade wars and the stock market, and that every moment we're talking about immigration is a moment that we're not talking about those things. But according to the latest polling from New York Times Siena, it shows that the issue of illegally deporting Kilmar Abrego Garcia was Donald Trump's worst polling issue of all of the questions that he asked. It had a net negative 21-point margin. And so it just goes to show that when you fight these virtuous fights, even though it might not comport with the usual idea of what's going to help Democrats, when you take it to the mat and go after these virtuous fights, clearly the vast majority of Americans will agree with you. And so, look, I'm glad to continue focusing on this issue, and it doesn't mean that we can't also talk about what's happening with regards to the economy. I know, at least on my channel just today, I spoke about the economy and the fact that the U.S. economy contracted 0.3%, whereas the rest of the world all saw economic growth. So we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We should walk and chew gum at the same time, and it is worth talking about this issue in particular.
Yeah, Brian, and let me follow up. You just explained the political reason to continue talking about the Abrego Garcia case. Let me add the legal and practical and constitutional reasons, because let me quote a judge, an appellate court judge, because remember, the Abrego Garcia case has already been up to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals once on its way up to the Supreme Court. And there is a judge that was appointed by no less than President Ronald Reagan, Judge Harvey Wilkinson. And here's what he said, and this is why it's so damn important for us to continue to talk about the Garcia case. He said, if the Trump administration can unconstitutionally deport Abrego Garcia, then it can unconstitutionally deport American citizens, and it can unconstitutionally deport Donald Trump's political opponents. So that is a very real and concrete and practical reason for us to continue to keep the focus and the pressure on the Garcia case.
Well, look, we will continue to stay on top of this. For those who are watching right now, if you'd like to follow along, please make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. That's not just a good way to support our work, but to support independent media more broadly, and we would definitely appreciate it. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.